It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Howdy, howdy, ho, hey, 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 he. Ha, ho, ho, ho. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. Thank you for joining us. Nice to have you with us. Matt Jorgenson is with us today. Matt is an author. He's written a number of books with some pretty incredible titles, such as Shh, Incoming, Subconscious, Extraordinary Ostriches, The Hermaphroditic Shaman and the Missing Bottle of Ketchup, Possible Particles, and the Bifurcated Homunculus, and Coagulation, a Clot of Stories. I like that one. He is with us today, and I got to say something about this interview, that it just was one of those interviews where we got talking and we just didn't stop until the clock ran out. And we hadn't even begun to touch on his other books. We just were not finished, and the time ran out. So I asked Matt if he would come back, and he was nice enough to say yes, that he will be back at some point for the part 2. So this is actually just part 1 of my interview with Matt Jorgenson. So look for part 2 in the not too distant future, probably in a couple of months. Whenever we can get Matt back on and get a recorded interview, we will put him up. Before we get to Matt, just one quick announcement. I want to say happy birthday to my dog, Tommy. He is 1 year old now. If you've been following us on Facebook, I've been posting pictures of him when he was a puppy. And the latest one I put was 10 pounds to 110 pounds in 1 year. So happy birthday to Tommy. And yes, he does listen to the show. Hopefully he will appreciate this birthday wish for him. Funny about these German Shepherd dogs, or Alsatians, if you live in the UK. I was reading that their body matures the first year, but it takes another year before their brain fully matures. So I've got this giant puppy. He's still very much a puppy. He jumps and plays and doesn't settle himself to anything. He's not a trained killer bomb sniffer that the army and the police use. He's just a big old friendly dog. But it's very funny to have a giant puppy like that. So we will be right back with Matt Jorgenson.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Go listen, download, and subscribe to The Douglas Coleman Show. It's available at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. Also on iTunes, Spreaker, and YouTube. The Douglas Coleman Show is an internationally syndicated talk and music show that features fascinating and sometimes famous guests from all aspects of the entertainment industry. The topics can range from light and fluffy to sober and serious. Our focus is on music artists, but we also feature producers, authors, directors, and even promoters. The Douglas Coleman Show. Sometimes chat, sometimes music, always entertaining. Again, it's available today at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. You can also connect with them on Facebook at Douglas Coleman Show 1, follow on Twitter at Douglas Coleman 3, and you can even find them on TuneIn Radio. Again, that's the Douglas Coleman Show at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS, iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, and more. Go listen, download, subscribe, and share with your social networks today.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
After the loss of my dog Mandy, I had difficulty sleeping. She had been my best friend for years. She slept on the end of my bed, and I found her snoring soothing. It was difficult for me, as I also found little support for my grief. Not being able to sleep was the worst. I decided to create an audiobook to help people like me. Listen to my voice as you drift into a peaceful sleep, taking a journey using your dog's memories, accompanied by rain falling, birds singing, and a waterfall. To get your download, go to Amazon and search Relax by Jane Yates. Thanks to Douglas Coleman for the spot.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. You know, all you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EWPSproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me the spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto!
Wrong hat.
I take a 7.5.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome my guest, Matt Jorgenson. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Pretty good, Douglas. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I noticed on your Skype, you're from Reynoldsburg. Where is that?
Reynoldsburg, Ohio. We're just east of Columbus.
Okay, because it says Reynoldsburg, USA. It didn't say Ohio, so I didn't know which state you were in.
Right.
Anyways,
well, you found the right spot. I'm a transplant though. I did not. My wife was born and bred in Ohio, very near here. I was not. I came from northern Illinois by way of Iowa. Go figure.
Okay. Let's see. You are an author, and you've got some really bizarre titles to your books. And in fact, a couple of them I had trouble even pronouncing, but I was practicing.
I'm pretty sure one of them.
I was practicing, so let's see. Okay, your books are called, I assume SHH is shh, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so that's one. And then you've got Subconscious, and then you've got Extraordinary Ostriches, and possible particles and the bifurcated bifurcated homunculus.
Homunculus.
Okay, I don't even know.
To talk over you.
I don't even know what that means. We'll get to that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
And the hermaphroditic shaman and the missing bottle. Hermaphroditic shaman and the missing bottle of ketchup. And this one I liked, the coagulation, a clot of stories. That was good. Very clever.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, before we get to those incredible titles, tell us just a little bit of your background and how you got into writing, and then we'll get to the books.
I was a very shy kid, but also very intellectually adventurous when I was younger, like think middle school, high school age. And I loved hanging out in the library, and I loved the escapism of movies. And then I learned about books, and I tried to investigate how you turn a book into a movie, and I'd go to the library and study that. And it all comes from the written word. That's where it starts. And then it has to grow from there. And I appreciated the authors that I was reading back in the time because I could escape from my social anxiety and my nervousness by reading, whether it was Stephen King or a similar author back in the day.
Okay, you said that you were a shy kid. Were you one of those antisocial kids? You didn't like to hang out with the others?
Kind of. I always wanted to have like one or two good friends. I sometimes would overcompensate about my anxiety and become the bad boy or the dangerous kid of the neighborhood. So I did a few things in my youth that maybe weren't the smartest things to do.
Oh, give us one example. Immediately what came to mind was the kids that used to put firecrackers in mailboxes.
Oh, yeah, that's not... That, to me... Oh, all right. I always appreciated that, but that was too, like, ordinary. And I think that's one of the reasons I got into art anyway, is because I was bored with the ordinary. I was a little bit of a pyromaniac, but not the typical mailboxes, firecrackers in the mailbox. I was more like, what's that stuff that they put on your chest when you have a cold?
Vicks?
Vicks. I was more like Vicks and Wicks. I was a little bit more irresponsible than the firecrackers in the mailbox.
Vicks and Wicks. Where would you put the Vicks?
Oh no, we would put candles in the Vicks, in the cans of Vicks. Set the candle on fire and then go home. And at some point, the candle would touch the Vicks and it would turn into a big thing, big situation that had to be dealt with.
Oh, is Vicks very flammable? I didn't know that.
Well, it was some kind of petroleum jelly that we were using. It's basically just like a candle on steroids. It wasn't really super dangerous, but it was... we were trying to show up a few people. One of my good friends in high school, his older brother had a copy of The Poor Man's James Bond. So we would look for recipes that were way more dangerous than we should have had access to when we were kids. But we didn't know any better, and we were the outliers, the misfits. We didn't fit in. We weren't on the football team or in the chess club. So we had to amuse ourselves some other way, and that turned out to be the way that a lot of us amused ourselves. And
I seem to remember that kids, or at least one kid that I remember, this is going back a long ways, you could put Vicks in like somebody's jockstrap.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You know, their genitals would start cooking, essentially. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I remember something like that. Somebody did.
Yeah,
not to me.
That was a little different than what we did. but that's totally a thing that was done back then.
Yeah.
One of the things I always like to do, I mean, I understand as an adult now that when I was a kid, I did things that weren't always smart. But one of the things I always try to do, and I even try to do this with my writing now, is I don't want to inflict harm on other people.
Okay, so there's no murders in any of your stories?
A few people might die, but it's not like shoot, there's certain subgenres in the horror industry where it's like psycho killers and what. That's never appealed to me. I like the story and the character development and the whatnot, but I also like the intensity. Like this year, in October, I worked at one of the state's highest rated haunted houses. I'm a big guy, and I was covered in fake blood, and I had a machete, and my job was to terrify people. If you don't know me very well yet, but if you get to know me more, I'm really a teddy bear. But in that situation, people are going and paying money to be terrified, and that was my job, was to terrify them. So I've always felt like scary situations or anything that really pulls you out of your comfort zone can be a cathartic moment.
Yeah, I think so. Some people don't like it, though. You know, some people sort of like their little comfort zone and their safe space, if you will. They don't want to get pulled out and feel uncomfortable.
Right. You're absolutely right. That's why I don't do rapey, murder, porn, horror fiction. I don't do that. And one of the reasons I went to work at this haunted house was because it's hard to get to, and they tell you don't bring your kids. They're very responsible about. You really pretty much have to desperately want to get there to get into it. When you get into it, it's terrifying. And if the wrong person gets in, it could be traumatic for them, but they're responsible about that. My wife and I both, before we even got married or thought about having a family, we went skydiving together.
Okay.
Not everyone should jump out of an airplane. If you decide, go ahead.
That doesn't terrify me. I've always wanted to do that, but I just haven't gotten around to it. I've always wanted to try that.
Right. Well, and the fact that you're telling me I've always wanted to do that, but I haven't gotten around to it yet, speaks to the responsibility of the people that run the places where you can do that. They don't make it super easy because they don't want just anyone coming in on a whim. They want people to think it through before they go.
So you can't just go to one of those places to say, I want to jump out of an airplane today, and they take you up. You have to be sort of...
Well, there's a few places where you could maybe do that, but very few people do. Most people have a self-preservation instinct that makes them think, maybe I should research it. Which place? There's 3 places that are drivable, distance from where I live, and I could go to this one or that one, and what are the statistics on... safety, and what do I need to know? And most people take time to examine the whole situation before they decide to go.
Do you know out of how many, out of 100 people that jump out of a plane, how many of them do their chutes fail and they die?
Well, my data is old because I decided when I wanted to have a family that I was going to stop jumping out of airplanes for a while. So it's been a while, but back when I was falling in love with my wife and getting ready to have a family, I did a lot of research. And the decision point I got to when I was looking at all the research data, I got a copy. I wish I could remember the name of the magazine. It was a magazine that catered specifically to people who jump out of airplanes. And they had reported the statistics for the prior year of all skydivers in America, how many of them died. And there were 26 people who had died that year out of everyone who jumped out of planes.
26 people, okay. Out of probably thousands, right?
Right. And then I read through the specific detail, this kind of stuff no one looks at, the boring data, what happened, how did it happen, whatnot. And most of it was human error. It was not equipment malfunction. It wasn't random. It was, we take things for granted in our everyday life, like driving to work and back, driving, whatever. We take these things for granted, and we think they're safer than they are. And then we think there's something that's terrifying about skydiving or base jumping or whatnot. And you start to look at the data and you start to analyze it rationally, and you start to realize maybe it's not so dangerous. Maybe I really can. All right, I'm about to diverge on a whole other story here. So reel me in if you think that that's appropriate.
Well, okay, let me just say this, and then you can go to your other story. What you're saying is true because statistically, a lot more people are afraid to fly than they are to drive their car, yet your chances of getting killed in the car are far greater than getting killed in a plane crash. So
Yes.
it's sort of unjustified fear, which I think was your point regarding skydiving. Yeah?
Well, and I think it speaks more to the larger point of why I write scary, adrenaline-inducing stories is because I think there's a catharsis. When I talk about catharsis, what I'm specifically talking about is you can read it on paper. You can read, yes, you're statistically more likely, but when you actually jump out of an airplane and you hit that adrenaline spike and you land on the ground and you survived, there's something to that whole experience that is that can affect your life in a way that's way more meaningful than just reading about it on a piece of paper.
The one thing that I do, or I've been told by people that have done this before, they said the most uncomfortable part is actually when the chute deploys and you get jerked back up into the air. They said that's the most uncomfortable part. The free fall's great, and then the, coming down real slow in the chute. But that point where the chute deploys, they've told me that's the most uncomfortable. Was that for you the most uncomfortable part?
There's a slight differentiation or a slight nuance I'd put on that statement. You're generally correct. People who skydive, somewhat frequently or more than once, it's absolutely the most uncomfortable part is when you open your chute and it jerks you. For beginners, though, it's summoning up enough, whatever it is, to hurl yourself out of an airplane. It goes against every fiber of your instinct to say, okay, I'm going to let go and I'm going to trust that all this is going to work and whatnot. When you get into the industry more or into the hobby or the sport or however you pursue it, and this isn't just, I'm using skydiving here as a metaphor. This applies to a lot of different facets of life. But when you get more, and what you were speaking to just previously, though, about when the chute opens, that's when things can go really bad. It's typically not when you jump out of the airplane that bad things happen. It's typically when you open the chute. So that's why they did an experiment a while back where they measured the heart rates of beginning skydivers and seasoned skydivers. And the beginning skydivers, their heart rate was always the highest right before they jumped out of the plane. The experienced ones, their highest heart rate was right before they opened the chute. And to speak a little bit more about opening the canopy, you're literally going from about 120 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour in 1 to 3 seconds. Yeah. So it's a rapid deceleration in the middle of the sky. So it's intense. It's very intense.
And there is a backup chute, right? In case one doesn't work, the first one?
If you're skydiving, yes. If you're base jumping, often no.
What you were saying was that's when things can go wrong. Example would be what? The chute doesn't come out right and it's all tangled up and twisted and doesn't open properly?
Or if you waited too long to deploy your main canopy. A lot of skydiving rigs are equipped with automatic activation devices that will fire your reserve canopy without your permission. I kind of equate it to driving on a snowy or icy road. That when you open your canopy, it's kind of like putting the brakes on when you're going downhill.
Oh, all right. It's
on a slippery road.
It's
and
that
you're
feeling, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've got it figured out.
Yeah, I always like that feeling when you hit the brakes and the car just keeps going.
Right. That's what, and people who do a lot of skydiving realize that really happens when you're in the air. And if you felt the heartbeat accelerate on the road before, like you just said, imagine that when you don't have a car and you're 1,000 feet above the ground and you're going 100 miles an hour.
You were going to go into a completely different story.
It was.
And then we sidetracked. So go ahead. Go ahead with that.
All right. I didn't make a note. I should have made a note here because I kind of lost my train of thought.
We
were talking skydiving. Base jumping.
If it's gone, don't worry about it. We'll just go to something.
I think I'll remember it in a minute. As soon as you start talking about something, I'll remember
You remember it. Okay. Well, I wanted to get to a couple of your titles. Which is your latest book? What's the one you're promoting right now?
The latest book that I have published is Shh.
Okay, tell us a little about that. Why that title?
Well, I can't tell you too much about the title without giving away too much about the plot.
Oh, all right.
And here we'll go into a little bit more information about not just titling or that book specifically, but when I get finished writing a book, I've spent anywhere from 6 months to 3 years hammering away at that manuscript, trying to get it right. Then I'm trying to build the book, and I have to have a small little title to put on the front cover to try to entice or give away a little bit of what happens in the story without giving away too much, just enough to draw the reader in. The general synopsis of Shh is it's kind of a love story, sort of. It's also horrific science fiction, doomsday apocalyptic story as well. But the general gist of it is that a busboy and a bartender fall in love. The town they fall in love in happens to be the site of an emergency military quarantine because a sentient infection has begun to assert its dominance over the town.
A what infection?
Sentient infection. Let me break that down a little bit. And I'll try to do this without giving away any spoilers. The sentient infection, which the name of the sentient infection is Shh, because it can hear everything you're saying. So you can't talk about it. Hence the title Shh.
Oh, okay. I've just never heard that word before. Is that a real word?
No, I think it's just something you say to somebody who's saying something that shouldn't be said in front of other people.
No, not shh, sentient. No, not sh, sentient.
Sentient. That means like you and I. That means aware. There's an aspect of artificial intelligence becoming aware that it exists independent of humans in the story.
Well, great.
So sentient speaks to our level of consciousness.
Learned a new word today. I had never heard that word in my life. All right, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
The reason I speak about it as a sentient infection is because typically when people talk about artificial intelligence, the singularity, other super high-tech things, it's always silicone-based. They never bring it back to biology. In this story, there is a biological virus working with a self-aware artificial intelligence that begins to take over the town. And in order to try to stop the spread of the infection, they have the people in the town have to resort to drastic measures to try to control that. It's kind of like a futuristic zombie movie. I mean, movie. I say movie because I eventually want to direct movies, but in this case, right now, it's a book.
What was that movie with Matt Damon that was about some infection? Something. I don't remember the title.
I'll remember it in a minute.
It came out maybe, 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Contagion.
I know
maybe it was Contagion. Something like that.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Is this like that?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, they might explore similar themes. That movie and my book might explore similar themes, but it's very different.
Do you find yourself having a hard time relating to people, to ordinary people? Because you seem seriously intelligent, but almost to the point of there's a fine line between genius and cuckoo. All right, I'm not suggesting you're either one. What I'm suggesting is that because you seem extremely intelligent, but like to the point where ordinary people would just bore the shit out of you.
Well, all right. You have a very valid point, and thanks for all the flattery, by the way. I'll Bitcoin you the payola for that later. One of the people that I listen to that's a constant, ongoing inspiration for me talks about how genius and madness are next door neighbors,
right?
And they borrow each other's sugar.
Yeah. Well, it is a fine line.
I wanted to be real flip right away and throw out something like, that's that line in the stand. I use that to jump rope with, or say something silly like that. But no, you bring up a very important point, and it is difficult to find people to talk to about these kind of things. But fortunately, and I think partly, a lot of people want to talk about how stupid the internet is, and it's, we're breaking down, but I have been able to find people that I can talk to that are great. And there was a time in my life where I was completely frustrated with everyday or ordinary normal people. However, as I've matured, I've learned to appreciate more and more aspects of life, from, the child that's born to a poor mother and grows up in a home that has lead paint and doesn't do well, and being a writer and being able to summon up characters in books that I'm writing forces me to think about all aspects of humanity. And even though I tend to write adrenaline-fueled thriller, horror kinds of things, art has always been about love for me. So I always want, when I'm done, when somebody finishes reading it or looks at, I want people to smile or be, even though I might write things that are terrifying, I want people to have a good experience, whatever that looks like for that particular person, regardless of their demographics.
How long have you been writing? I mean, how long have you been writing books that have been published, I should say?
I started in 2003.
Okay. How have you, are you making a living at it? You selling enough books that the money's coming in, or do you do something else?
I do something else. I mean, to pay the bills and whatnot. But that's a question that all artists have to face at some point. Society doesn't value the playmakers, the artists, writers, and whatnot, often until they're dead. I mean, when I was in art school, Van Gogh was my hero, and he didn't get famous until long after he was gone.
Right.
He lived on nothing, but he just threw himself passionately into what he was good at.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I think to some degree the internet and technology, this is one of the bitches I get in with the musicians especially, is that people don't want to pay for music anymore. And back in, when I was a kid, we would buy record albums. And you could make a good living selling recorded music. Now you really can't. The whole thing has changed. So I don't know that it's the same scenario for authors, because if you put something online, people have to pay to download it. You don't give a freebie away on YouTube. See, this is where the musicians will differ, because they'll put a video out on YouTube for free with the song, and then they'll try to stick the song all by itself on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, and everybody just goes to YouTube and gets it for free, you see. So with a book, you can't really do that. I mean, you put it somewhere where if somebody wants the book, they can download it to Kindle or whatever, or buy the paperback or hard copy or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, authors are a little bit more protected. It's
a little bit. Yeah. It's a I've recently started working with some musicians, because one of the frustrating things about being an author is most of the stuff I do is by myself at home. And I don't have the feedback that like a performing musician gets, when they go play, club so-and-so or such and such bar down the street. They get applause, they get feedback and whatnot. One of the restaurants in my town recently started doing open mics, and I would go and do live readings from my books. A paragraph here, maybe a couple pages here. And because it was primarily designed to be an open mic for musicians, I got to talking to a lot of musicians, and a couple of them ended up doing music for some of my readings, kind of like beat poetry almost.
Okay.
That was really fun. And that's honestly, I've had to reconcile myself with the fact that I might never be a wealthy author. I might make money some other way or whatnot, but I've been in the arts for so long, and I love working with other artists, and that's the one thing that has kept my spirits up and kept me working and kept me going out and doing new things, and working with musicians. And it's nice to share notes, like you were just talking about, Spotify and YouTube and whatnot, and how that might, and there, I don't know, aside from giving away free books, what authors do to try to break into the new thing.
I know that the big money is in film rights.
Yeah.
If you can sell the film rights. I've always wanted
to be a director, and I'm trying to head that way. So
I know one person specifically who wrote a book. It was a fiction. It was about 200, 300 pages. And Paramount picked up the film rights and paid her $800,000.
That's nice.
Yeah. And then the film never got made, but she got the money anyways. So, she would have got a lot more if the film had been made. But, you can't really complain about somebody writing you a check for $800,000. As far as like making a living selling books, I don't know. You'd have to sell an awful lot of them, I think.
Well, no. And I'm glad that you mentioned that story about your friend, because, I think about eventually finding myself in a situation like that. I probably should have told you, I'm currently working on my first script for my first movie that I'm going to direct. But I think, okay, so let's say in your example, Paramount comes and offers you $800,000, and you get that money, and sure, that's a great payday. I know I'm speaking trivially about a lot of money. I would rather have Paramount pay me $80,000 for a year for 3 years, and if they don't make the movie, I get the rights back. I would rather take a much smaller upfront thing, because I want the movie to be made. I don't want it to sit on a shelf and collect dust.
Well, that's a good point. I don't suppose she got the rights back. I don't know. Maybe she did.
They often don't. Typically, from what I've heard, I'm just trying to learn the game. Oftentimes what will happen is that, let's say that A-level celebrities with an A-level director will buy the rights to a book that they're going to make into a movie. And then some other minor studio, within or without the umbrella of a company like Paramount, will find another author who has maybe even a better story, but they're lesser well-known, they're lesser and sometimes people will actually buy rights to a book or a script or whatever, because they don't want it to step on the other project that they already have in development, and they'll just let it wither on the vine. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen to any of my projects. I'd rather make less money and make sure they get made than make a whole lot of money and have them sit around and collect dust.
I suppose you could stipulate that in your contract before you sold it, but you don't really have control. Well, no, like you said, if it doesn't get made, you get it back. That you could stipulate. So,
right. Yeah, I'd be totally willing to do that. I'd be like, pay me, just pay me some hush money for a few years. If you make it, you make it. And I'd even take less on the back end. I want it to get made. I don't need $1 million. I mean, it would be nice. I'm not saying I couldn't spend it.
Well, yeah, there's a point with money, speaking of money, where like somebody like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, who's into the billions of dollars, they can't possibly spend it all in their life. It just is impossible because the money keeps making money. And yeah, unless you stuff it in your mattress, but even if you did that, you still couldn't spend it all unless you just started buying buildings in Manhattan one by one or something. But then those would make money, because you'd lease the space, and I mean it's like a circle. So there is a point where people have too much money. I'm not saying that they should take it away from them. I'm not a communist like that. I think people in our society have the right to make as much as they want to make. But you're right. There is a point to where you can just say, okay, look, I'm not going to ever get to that level of money. So I just need enough that I can live comfortably. And usually with artists, it's I need enough so I can do my art full time and not have to go work at McDonald's to pay the bills. Then they're happy, typically. They got enough money to pay the bills, to have a nice space. I know artists, and I'm including authors and musicians and actors, and are very sensitive to their environment. And
you're absolutely. If you're talking about me, you're absolutely right.
I mean, like, you got to have everything set up just the way you like it to sit down and start writing. Probably, yeah.
Well, yeah. I think sometimes people can also use that as an excuse to not getting their work done. But you have a great point here, and I'm getting to the point right now where I would much rather find mid-range independent studio who's willing to throw 5-6 figures at me to like make my first movie, but I get to stay here in Reynoldsburg and I get to use most of my people. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to take direction. I'm not saying that I'm this egotistical person who's going to run in and try to control everything and waste your money. I want everyone to be successful. I want the financiers. I want the producers, the director, the talent. I want to hire some of my friends. And ultimately, I want to sit in the audience when the movie is played and to see reactions from people that are meaningful.
I'm glad you said that about you don't want to run the whole show. I got another story that relates to that.
Oh, okay.
It was a guest who was on the show. I won't mention his name. But he wrote a book, and he shopped it around for the film rights. Mm-hmm. One studio, I don't remember which studio, but it must have been one of the bigger ones, offered him $10 million for the budget to make the film. Okay, because he had, like you said, he had everybody all set up, and he had the director, he had the actors, blah, 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 blah. And so he was the writer, but he wanted to kind of control the whole thing. They offered him $10 million to make the film. Here's your $10 million, go make the film. He had a production company already. They wanted to make a couple of changes in the script. Mm-hmm. And he said no.
Right.
And it was like really minor little changes in the script because it was a true story. I guess he objected because then whatever they wanted to change wasn't true. But nobody would know that. Do you know what I mean? If anybody watched it, nobody would know that didn't really happen. They just wanted to Hollywood it up a little bit. And so he turned him down. And now he's sitting on this book and no money and still shopping it around. And I just thought he was out of his mind. That he wouldn't bend, for that.
All right. Is this a PG-13 show or can I use curse words?
No, you can say whatever you want.
All right. First of all, I would bend over backwards for credible, positive, helpful, creative input into anything I did, regardless of how much I was being paid. If we're doing a short video for something local here and the budget's tiny and I'm not getting paid much, but we're all having fun and we're doing something good, I will tap dance and jump upside down and learn how to jump rope again to make it happen. I think that sometimes when you're getting paid, there's money involved, and you can start to make compromises. And I don't think making compromises is always bad. I think sometimes that there are people who want to push it too far. Or anyway, I was about to swear. All right, here comes the big swear word. It's good. The F-bomb is coming up. Is when you have fuck you money, when you have enough money that you can say no to $10 million. You can have more creative control over what you're doing. And I don't necessarily think that that's wrong. I think sometimes it's unfortunate because I think sometimes the lesser movie gets made because of those kind of compromises.
Right. Well, I'm sure he wasn't sitting on 10 million when he got offered that 10 million.
Oh, yeah.
Because if he was, he would have made the film. You know, so
well, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It made no sense to me because, and he was so sort of adamant about it. He was like, well, they wanted to change this part and it just didn't happen that way. And, you know, if, like you said, if he had the fuck you money, okay. And if he had 5 films under his belt, okay. But this was his first time out. Not too many people get that sort of an opportunity the first time out.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think that one of the things that sometimes, and I'm not trying to use this phrase in a derogatory fashion. I think sometimes the bean counters don't necessarily have the capacity to understand that some people aren't moved by money. Like, let's say, for example, I'm extrapolating here. I don't know the person you're talking about, but that person could have been really, really motivated by being able to have a Starbucks grande latte next to his dog every morning. And if the studio had said, we'll give you $10 million plus while we're in development, you can hang out with us with your dog and we'll buy you a cup of coffee. And that might have been enough. Sometimes, like you were talking about how important the environment of creative types is.
Right.
I think speaks to this exact situation, potentially.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I don't know your friend, so.
It is like that with some people. And what you were saying about the bean counters is also very true with music. That's been quoted.
Oh, yeah.
That's been quoted a million times. You know, the record label executives know nothing about music.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really apparent these days because what they're selling on the major labels to me isn't even music. You know, it's like they're just selling the cover, forget the book.
It's music invented by committee and portrayed as if it was this artist or that artist, but it's really
it's
bunch of
right. It's music that's been created by a computer, essentially, and then they just throw a sexy, glossy cover on it that tours around the country and dances around while somebody in the backstage has a pad that runs the electronic music over it.
Yeah. I was having a nice conversation with one of my kids earlier today. We were talking about the movie franchise, The Expendables, that has like Sylvester Stallone and Jason Statham and whatnot in it. And it's an intentionally hackneyed thriller film that looks like it would have been invented by like studio execs who don't know the first thing about directing, but because all of these famous actors from all these different thrillers have come together, it's almost satirical in a way that makes it work.
What's it called again?
It's The Expendables. There's several of them. It's a franchise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds kind of interesting. I sort of like that.
Right. I'm trying to think of the musical equivalent because I think music is your main language, artistically speaking.
True.
From what I'm hearing. So I'm trying to think of what it would be like. It would be like, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you think of a musician you respect who's done an amazing cover of a song that was really lame and stupid when it first came out? They've like reimagined it in a way. You don't have to. I'm sorry I put you on the spot. I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that.
No, I just can't think of one right off the top of my head.
No, I don't.
Because most of
that's why I'm asking you, because I know way less about music than you do.
Well, the problem is all the musicians that I respect write their own music. So
all right.
Anything that they covered, and especially if they did cover something, they did a great job, and it wasn't a lame song to begin with. So I'm having trouble coming up with something. The only thing that came to mind was when Paul McCartney worked with Kanye West.
Okay.
I thought that was just him working with him was like, why? You know, because Paul seriously pissed off a lot of the Beatles fans. Because
because
the Beatles were gods to people from the 60s. And then he works with that guy who a lot of people don't like and think he has no talent. So it was just a weird situation. But as far as an actual song, no, I don't know.
From the actor, director, movie side of things, I will never forget watching Willem Dafoe tap dance on Saturday Night Live and sing like a show tune, because he was always, typecast as the mean, bad, scary person, and I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, I've never seen De Niro tap dance.
Yeah, but he did that movie about going through psychotherapy that was kind of funny. Analyze this, analyze that.
Oh, yeah. That was good.
Yeah. That he kind of brought his ego down, his stage, facade. He showed you a little bit of the human in him.
That was with Billy Crystal, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that was good. I haven't thought about that movie in years. Actually, that's my one that I might look up because that was very funny. Yeah, and it was a spoof on his sort of Italian mafia heritage in the movies, because wasn't that the deal, that he was a gangster who had some psychological issues?
He was having like a midlife crisis or something.
And crisis of conscience.
Was his therapist, but he still had to deal with the family and the maid men and all that.
Right.
Even though he was emotionally melting down, he wasn't the Rock, the tough guy, like he has been in all of his movies that he's done. He was different.
Yeah,
he broke character, basically.
And then there was that scene at the end where they had like all the heads of the families come together, and Billy Crystal had to come and pretend like he was somebody, and he says, "What's this suit made out of? Chrome?" He had
he had to be the consigliatore. Is that my Italian's not very good.
I think consigliere. Yeah.
Consigliere. Okay.
Yeah, that was funny. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I was looking for something. I was thinking, what am I going to watch this weekend? Because I always like to watch movies on the weekend, and that'll be the one.
There's another great movie that kind of breaks the whole mold. Scorsese did a movie called After Hours.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
It's very much New York City, but it's totally not about the mob or mafia or people getting hit. Cheech and Chong are in the movie.
Well, there you go. That's all you need to say. If they're in the movie, then it's just going to be wacky. Yeah.
It was, but it's well done. It was wacky, well done, off type. It was a good movie.
It's interesting how movies have gone. Like the indie, like music, okay? The mainstream stuff is very put together, for lack of a better word, manufactured, assembled. I'm thinking
those are good words.
Of the James Bond movies. I watched the last one was called Spectre. $200 million budget, great effects and locations, all of this stuff. He probably had 2 pages of dialogue in the whole movie. I mean, just nothing.
Yeah. Was that Daniel Craig who did that one?
Right, that was Daniel Craig, yeah. Okay. But then, like, the real good story type movies have moved off of the plate of the big studios. They're kind of like on spin-off studios. And it's similar with music to me. I make that comparison because the mainstream music is just manufactured. But if you go into the indie side, that's where all the artists went. These are the real singer-songwriter, spill your guts out type people.
I think we have one of the last available indie music stations in the country here in Ohio. It's CD 102.5. They support local independent bands and whatnot, but the problem becomes something similar to what we talked about before: is how do you eat? Right. How do you have a family? How do you pay the mortgage? How do you, I'm not saying anything bad, trying to say anything bad about that specific situation, But I agree. I think that the real meat is when you get independent people who are creative and they want more than just the money. I'm going to sell you a ticket or a book or an album or a song for a certain amount of money. But I really don't want your money if you don't like the song or the book or the movie. I want more for you to like. I want to eat. I want to pay health insurance. But what I most want is for you to enjoy this.
Well, I think that's good. I mean, I think that's people that have a certain level of personal integrity about their art, about their craft, and they're not just smacking it together. That's great. I think that that's something that people should be commended for.
Most of us have at least one or two moments where it's, do I maintain, like the guy who's sat on the book for $10 million. I'm not saying he made the right decision in that situation, but he could be portrayed as an example of the dilemma that's faced by a lot of creative people.
Oh, yeah. As an example, yes. As a specific example, no.
Right. That's why I want to differentiate.
Right. As a general example, yeah. He probably had a lot of pride about the book because it was personal and because it was a true story. It was dealing with his family, actually. Yeah, okay. That's very commendable, but I had a producer, actor, playwright guy on a couple years ago, and he said the first thing that artists have to do, and this could apply to any kind of artist, writer, musician, actor, whatever, is you have to decide if you want to do this for a living or you want to do it just because you love doing it. He says you've got to draw the line because once you decide that you're going to do it for a living, it becomes a business. And he says you have to take that part of you out. That's why a lot of artists have managers, because the manager can actually deal with the business side, hopefully, and leave the artist alone to create. Okay. Right.
And that whole thing that you're trying to talk about right now is one of the reasons why I'm not willing to just completely dismiss the whole Hollywood studio system, is because if you find the right first of all right, I have to preface this statement a little bit before we get into it, but I think art can be anything. I think art, if you're the most amazing bean counter in the world and you study bean counting all day long and that's your strength, and you find somebody who needs the most amazing bean counter and is really passionate about bean counting because he doesn't know how to count beans, if those two guys get together, they can make magic happen.
Sure. Yeah. Well, a good band with the right manager is the same setup,
Right.
Hey, Matt, you know what?
Yep.
Would you like to come back and we can do part 2? Because we've just blown through an hour and that's as long as the show is. I don't feel like we're finished talking yet.
I don't either.
I think that we could go
like
for another.
We're friends that are just getting to know each other.
So let's plan on a part 2 in the
awesome. Love it.
Not too distant future. Just so we can kind of wrap this up, give us your website, please, so people can come and check you out.
It's mattjorgenson.com. Just run it all, www.mattjorgenson.com.
Super. All right, Matt. Well, this will to be continued, yeah?
Fantastic, Douglas. So glad I got a chance to talk to you. Look forward to talking to you again.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Matt Jorgenson. And please look for part 2 of this interview with Matt coming up in the near future. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.